I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. And for those of you just joining us, enter in your name and the company that you're from so that we can get to know you as we kick off this event. So for those of you who I haven't met, my name is Danya Madhusudan. I joined Insight in March to support our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Last summer, Insight made a commitment to 21 initiatives for DE&I as a firm, and one of which is to support our portfolio companies with a DE&I CEO ScaleUp pledge. So I've joined to operationalize this pledge, and part of my role here is to bring together all the great work our portfolio companies are doing to build a community of best practices. And as you'll hear today, incorporating DE&I efforts into our work is a journey that we're all on together. And whether you're just in the beginning stages of your journey or a few steps along the way to creating an equitable workplace, this conversation will provide you with practical tips and lessons learned. So before I hand it over to our esteemed speakers today, I want to go over some quick housekeeping. Please make sure that you're on mute to reduce any background noise. And we encourage you to ask questions for our panel in the Q&A module, which is right next to the chat function. And for those of you who just joined us, if you haven't already done so, please introduce yourself and the company you work for in the chat function. I do want to call out that we will be recording this event and it'll be posted on our blog. So I encourage you to head over to our blog to check out great content. I also want to take a moment to introduce our ScaleUp pledge. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly share my screen. So Insight launched our ScaleUp pledge in January of this year. And we are so proud to see more portfolio companies. Oh, I just realized that this wasn't presenting. Apologies. We are so proud to see more portfolio companies take part in this commitment to change, and we welcome all of you to join us. We believe that change begins at the executive level, and so we're asking CEOs to join the pledge and use their influence to build inclusive teams, and we're collectively committing to a quarterly DE&I report. And in return, as part of the pledge, organizations gain access to a community with curated partner offerings, resources, and discussions. So I'm going to be posting the link to the pledge in the chat, and I encourage you to learn more about it. And at the bottom of the page, you're going to see my email. And so please feel free to reach out to me and we'll set up a conversation to discuss the pledge. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce our speakers today. Today we have Rocky Howard, Chief Diversity Officer of Smart Recruiters, Philip Swope, Director of People Operations at Payit, Angela Siddall, Senior Global Director of Talent Attraction at VM, and these are all portfolio companies. And we have Arthur Woods, our esteemed moderator, who is a co-founder of Matheson and author of Diversity Hiring. And so what I'll do is I'm going to kick it off to Rocky to start off our introductions, and then we'll kick off the conversation from there. So Rocky, over to you.
Well, hello, everyone. I hope I can be seen and heard. I'd like to say that tech company people don't ever have tech problems, but I'll be honest, I'm having some tech problems today. The internet has gone out in my house, and so I'm on my cell. So I hope you will bear with me. My name is Rocky Howard. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer at Smart Recruiters. I'm also the host of the Voices of Diversity podcast, and I'm so excited to be here with you today. And I will tell you, I identify as she, her, Black, Christian, Gen X, wife, mom. I think it's important to embrace all dimensions of diversity because honestly, there are unique value propositions in how we show up in the world. And I thought I would just share a little bit with you about our journey and our DEIB journey at Smart Recruiters. And I wanted to start by sharing with you through the lens of why I think it's so important for corporate leaders to take a stand. And an authentic stand. So our CEO, Jerome Turnick, after listening to some of the experiences of his own team members, made the decision last year that if he leveraged not only his personal influence, but our organization's power and privilege as a leader in the HR tech space, that he could focus on eradicating racism and bias in the recruiting industry. That's our driver at Smart Recruiters. That's why diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging is so important to us, because we believe by helping hopefully thousands of companies not only to achieve diversity hiring success, now we are changing people's lives. And diversity ultimately, we believe, should be about people. And that's our driver. That's why it's so important. So my role is twofold, and my journey is twofold. Part one of my role is to empower our base of over 4,000 clients with a framework to achieve diversity hiring success. And we have taken a bold step on that journey by creating our diversity hiring toolkit, which, by the way, is free to any company who would like to use it. It's not just for our clients. And it allows companies to benchmark their diversity hiring maturity and by taking an assessment, and it allows you to receive a report, a 20-page report, as a matter of fact, with detailed actions in terms of what you can do to improve your diversity hiring. We've had over 350 companies take this assessment, and that really makes me proud when I think about where we are on the journey. The other part of my role is for me to spend time making sure that Smart Recruiters has a culture where equity, inclusion, and belonging is a priority, and diversity is really an expectation. And so within our own organization, we have spent time educating every single leader in inclusive leadership principles, based on Arthur and I's friend Jennifer Brown's book, How to Be an Inclusive Leader. And all organizational leaders have become advocates to helping us to advocate and advance the diversity work that we're doing, because we've helped them to understand what their roles are. And collectively, we've determined and published leadership accountability principles that we hold each other to, and we've encouraged our teams to hold us accountable as well. This diversity narrative, this diversity challenge is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And I feel like as an organization, Smart Recruiters are on that journey. We're fully committed. And I'm confident that we're keeping the right balance of making impact and making sure that we never forget that this journey isn't just about the benefits you get from a diverse organization. Increased productivity, innovation, financial rewards. All of those are benefits of being a diverse organization. But ultimately for us, this is about doing the right thing by people. So I'm so glad to meet you. I'm so glad to be here today. And I'm so happy to have the opportunity to introduce myself. And I'm going to hand it over to one of my peers.
Hello, am I on screen? I think I am. Hello, everybody. It's always a hard act to follow when you've got Rocky before you. Everybody, my name is Angela. I'm a South African who is currently living in the English countryside. I work for a company called Veeam Software, and I have done for approximately 2 years now. I get to look after 3 areas at Veeam within the people strategy. So one of the things I look after is employer branding, employee engagement, and more recently, DE&I. And I love the role that I have within Veeam because I love the fact that I actually get to look at all of these 3 areas, because I think it's the culture that you create from within, and creating a culture that truly is engaging and motivating and inclusive for everyone is what ultimately is going to help us shine through externally. And when I sort of first picked up on this role within Veeam, already Veeam is an incredibly successful business. We're a global business. We're across 40 different countries around the world. And so the question is we must be doing something right, because success for a business only comes if you're doing something right in that space. But how are we going to go from being number 2 in modern data protection to number 1? And starting on this journey, and I say it's a start, not because we were doing everything wrong, but you need to kind of focus somewhere. And some of the questions that we were looking at and we were trying to explore is where do we start? Where should the focus be? And how do we ultimately bring all of our employees with us, especially across all of those geographies that I was mentioning previously? And one of the things that was really important to us is we wanted to do it in such a way that we didn't just keep creating more polarization that we see out there in the world. And so where we started was a sense of ethos, or an objective of, we want to focus on this topic globally. We want it to be something that every single person across every single geography within Veeam could get behind. And it's something that really resonates with the one Veeam team culture that we're trying to drive. It needed to add business value, and it needed to be core to the values of who it is that we stand for as a business, and how it is that we behave as a business. And so how we've sort of gone on our journey is we've explored sort of 2 sides, and I think Rocky touched on these herself, which is, how do we celebrate the unique, brilliant individuals that we have across the business, and really kind of shine a spotlight on what makes us the same and what makes us different, but at the same time, really foster this culture of belonging. And for us, that was something that we believe at Veeam we can all get behind, because we genuinely believe that that's what makes successful business. And we call this ethos at Veeam distinctly Veeam. We don't talk about DE&I as a separate department or a standalone initiative. For us, what we want this to be is core to the business that we are, and core to everything that it is that we're trying to drive in this space. And starting that journey, the first 2 areas that we thought made the most sense for us to really start on was, number 1, we needed to make sure that we were widening the talent that we were trying to attract to Veeam. So we could see that internally, the demographics that made up Veeam were not as complementary as the demographics that make up the world on the outside. We weren't bad by any means. We were very close to the good side. However, we believe that we want to do more, and we could be doing better in that space. So how do we become a company that certain demographics might not have thought of, and that would potentially want to work for a company like ours? The other area that we really push and want to make sure that we're doing the most of or harnessing is truly listening, understanding, and appreciating each other. As I mentioned before, we are made up of so many different cultures across 40 countries, and that's lots of different cultures that actually have to come together and do business and be effective and work well. And so one of the drivers of the things that we stand behind is, how do we level the cultural understanding, the appreciation of each other on our journey? And we do it for the exact same reasons that Rocky mentioned. We do it because it's the right thing to do. We do it because it's good for business, it's good for innovation, it's good for creativity, and it will give us the competitive edge that we believe will take us to number 1. But also we do it because we believe we have a role as committed companies for driving the sort of change that we want to see out there in the world. So thank you very much, everyone, for having me. Hopefully I can add some values to your agenda, and I look forward to listening to other speakers. I think, Philip, it's over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Phil Swope. I'm the head of people at Pay It. I identify as he, him, Black, Christian, millennial, a loving family man, and a hardworking professional that's passionate about people. I have 10+ years of experience in the HR and people operations space. I joined Pay It in 2018 as their first people hire, working as our strategic business partner in everything from HR strategy, talent, employee engagement, and development, and why we're all here today, DE&I. I actually consider myself very fortunate to come from an underrepresented background. It gives me a plethora of life experience to draw upon. As a first-time head of people, I took on the challenge of parlaying some of my life experience into programmatic efforts that we could then operationalize into DEI programs for our business at Pay It. So when I think about Pay It, we're so early in our DEI journey. We're just getting started. We too like to remind ourselves that it's a journey and not a destination. You'll hear that theme a lot today. As first-time heads of people, it's easy to get imposter syndrome. As someone who comes from an underrepresented background, it's so easy to let that imposter syndrome creep in. But the biggest thing I want to tell everyone, some of you might be hesitant to start this journey, is don't let it stop you. You can look at the Smart Recruiters maturity model, or where organizations like Netflix and Uber are with their published DEI reports, or read the Deloitte Global Report on Diversity and Inclusion and feel intimidated that you're not as far along in your journey as those other companies might be, or how can I ever catch up? I talk to junior HR professionals in my mentee network that might feel like they're just simply posturing. Don't let that stop you from starting your journey. I remember talking to Rocky and her saying something like 70% of companies that took the DEI Smart Recruiter survey were in phase 1 of the maturity model. If you're a portfolio company or another company that's thinking, where do I start, or I'll never get there, the data says that there's more of us that are earlier in our journey than not. So many other organizations are probably a lot more like you than less like you. Remember, it's progress over perfection. You don't just get it right and you're done and walk away. You're always trying to get it righter. When I think about the core of our business at Pay It, for us, I think this journey started at the beginning, started with our vision, started with the core of what we do. Our platform enables folks like you and me to complete services with state and local governments. We're demystifying access to government. We're democratizing access to government. And that's so powerful. That's our driving force. And that was the very beginning for us. The inclusion journey started in our vision. Many of us on this call can probably afford to take time off to go to a DMV or to a city hall. We might not want to do it, but we can afford to take the time off. Pay It started with the belief that if I was a single dad that was working 2 jobs to keep up, that person might not be able to access services in the way that they need. So democratizing government services for all of us is at the core of what we do. We partner with agencies, we help them support their constituents, those human beings that are at the center of this. Creating inclusion for government services is in our DNA. When I think about folks across the organization that are advocating and helping advance this work, I realize that so many of us were compelled by that mission. I wanted to solve for how we could amplify those voices, always looking for areas where we can be more intentional as an organization, as a team, and as a Pay It community. Using our early building blocks to continue to build upon, we tried to create space to listen so that we could get better at this stuff. Our early work created some additional mechanisms for our workforce to surface their ideas as an avenue for more open discussion and dialogue. And then the snowball effect started. I'm sure there are other heads of people, first-time HR leaders, first-time executives that might be thinking, this is a massive hill to climb. But I assure you, you have a bigger village behind you than you probably realize. There are so many people at Pay It that are advancing this work, and we love having those voices amplified. The momentum will build quickly if you get the journey started. When I think about my own journey, coming from an underrepresented background, this work hits so close to home to me. If it weren't for so many great mentors and coaches that helped to move mountains for me in the past, people that took a chance on me, I know that I wouldn't be where I am today. I often reflect and remember that many people that grew up in inner city Milwaukee, my childhood friends, might not have been exposed to the same opportunities that I've been. And I'm lucky to be exposed to them. And sometimes I think we all just need a chance. When I think about the chances I've been blessed with, I've tried my darndest to capitalize on those. And there are so many people out there that might look like me or look entirely different than me that just need the opportunity. When I reflect on some of the tech companies that I've worked for in the past, the workforce populations were just so homogenous. We all know what the data says. Rocky's talked about it. Angela's talked about it. It's not just about outcomes. I think that if we all can agree that if humans are what drive our platforms forward, that every company's workforce should represent the communities and the population they serve. I'm so glad to be here with you today. Thank you for having me. Arthur?
Thank you, Phil. Wow, I don't know if everyone caught the beautiful background Phil has there, but that really looks amazing. I think we all want to be there, Phil. Great to see everyone. My name is Arthur Woods. My pronouns are he, him. I grew up in a rural town, in an evangelical community, and in a family that was single parent, and went to college first in my family, and I came out and joined the LGBTQ community halfway through college. So I had a really interesting kind of identity crisis as I entered my career, which caused me to actually join the advocacy world. And by day, I was working on nonprofits, and by night, I was getting into HR technology companies. And I found myself in this really interesting world of sort of seeing my personal identity in one place and my professional identity in another. And it was a really powerful day when I showed up to work and felt embraced to come out to my colleagues, and realized that so many of the challenges we faced in the HR world and the people world around not being able to reconcile inclusion had really, sort of spoken to the new change that's happening today. I ended up basically being able to start an HR technology company a couple of years ago called Matheson, that has focused on building technology for diversity recruitment, for helping companies develop equitable hiring practices, basically reduce bias in their hiring systems, and cast a wider net in the way that they source candidates from underrepresented communities. So we found ourselves, like many in the last 2 years, at this exciting, challenging, but also extraordinarily kind of demanded space where we, the events that we all witnessed in the last 2 years really reminded us, as if we hadn't already known, of the extraordinary inequity that exists in the workplace, the lack of representation that exists in the workplace. And, the events of the last 2 years also accelerated this urgency for so many to act. I think we saw that, as Rocky and I have discussed, what we thought would take 10 years to solidify and really sort of come to being became 10 months. Every leader and every organization found themselves looking around the room, wondering, why are we not seeing enough diversity? Why are there not enough representative communities at the top of every organization? So for us, this was kind of a galvanizing moment at Matheson, where we decided to accelerate a lot of our research, and we started to really go and ask leaders that we were working with across hundreds of organizations, what are the equitable hiring practices that are working for you today? What isn't working? We actually authored the first book in our category called Hiring for Diversity that comes out this August, where we spent time, really profiling different organizations on this journey right now. And I think, a lot of the themes that we were seeing kind of indicated why diversity hiring in particular had been facing so many challenges today. Why is it that despite, over 10 years, 15 years of organizations talking about this need, have so many not seen results? Why is it that we've seen, 70%, to Rocky's point, of organizations still in the early stages of the maturity model? And there were a couple of themes that emerged that we talked about in the book. The first is that we have to look at this work in a systemic way. If we think that simply going and posting to a diversity job board and checking the box is going to be enough right now, we have to kind of rethink everything. The challenges of us building diversity in our workforce really begin at the systemic oppression and systemic inequity that have existed in our organizations and in society since day one. And we have to address the fact that this work isn't simply just about checking a box or posturing. A diversity job board will not fill our needs. We have to rethink our entire systems, our entire structures, to develop equitable experiences for everyone. A second theme is we have to take an inclusive approach to the way that we look at diversity. We found that in so many cases, we'd walk into a room and a leader thought of diversity purely through the lens of race and gender. And this failed to recognize that people with disabilities, veterans, refugees, and immigrants, so many communities like the formerly incarcerated community, have to be accounted for in the way that we holistically look at the underrepresented and marginalized communities that aren't in our organizations. And until we look at diversity in a holistic way, we're not aiming for the same definition of success. And the final piece is that this function, as we have seen it, of growing diversity in our organizations, has typically been delegated to the people team, to our recruiters alone. So what it's meant is the leadership team of our organizations has said, we need to become more diverse. Let's tell HR to go figure that out. And what that's meant is we have completely missed the fact that this is an entire organization effort. In order to actually grow diversity in our organizations, we need everyone. Every single person who touches our hiring process, every person who can look at their networks and cast a wider net, every person who can influence how we elevate communities that aren't currently around the table today. And until we empower the entire organization to be involved in this work, it will stay a minimized delegated effort that isn't sustainable. So the last thing that I'll mention that I think is probably most exciting is this is a moment where we can certainly look around the room and say that we haven't done enough, that there's so much more that needs to be done. We're so early in the efforts. And there's been a lot of shame and I think in many ways kind of anguish that has created. We're not doing enough. We need to do more. I think what is most exciting for me, and I know that my fellow panelists will agree here, is that this is not a time where we have to think about what we haven't done and shame. We can think about the extraordinary possibilities of what we can do. There's so much generosity that's bubbling up in our space. There is so much that we're all collectively learning as we write this new playbook for work. And the possibilities far outweigh the cost of us not acting. And so that's really going to be what our conversation really evolves to today. These three panelists who are so inspiring, their stories are really just, it's been so lovely getting a chance to work with them. And Rocky, by the way, is featured in our book. So she's just been such an amazing buddy in this effort. I want to start by asking the panelists, what are some of the biggest challenges you are facing in this work? We've all had a chance to hear kind of where you are in the journeys. And maybe we can go around the room and quickly ask sort of what are some of the mistakes that you've made or maybe areas where you've learned along the way that might be useful for everyone here to learn. So Angela, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Arthur. I think it's a very good question, because for me, I think the biggest challenge that we have is the starting point, which was how do we do this globally? How do we look at it with not just a singular lens? I have my own views, I have my own perspectives of the world and how I want the world to look and how I want the world to be. But what I was kind of really struggling with, I think at the beginning, was trying to sort of get something that I believe that everybody at Veeam could get behind. If you go to a different country, I mean, a perfect example of that, I was on a call with our ERGs earlier today, and going around the room and hearing, with some of the things that they're driving and some of the things that they, would like to see more of or less of. And I mean, for me, it's just a listening journey always. One thing I found is just how different it is wherever you are in the world. And so for me, I think the biggest challenge is global, the global nature of finding something for a global business that everyone can get behind. I think the challenge that we have constantly, but I think it's getting better, is talking about this not as a standalone topic. It should never be different to your business strategy. It should never be something that's a standalone. And I think getting it on the agenda of the senior leaders, making sure that we're getting the right buy-in and that people really understand the criticalness of getting this right for business. And it's not a fluffy standalone topic. It's something with real value and real meaning. And I would say those are probably the two things for me that I've had the biggest challenges with, but also surprisingly good embracing from our leaders as well. So that's what I would
Those are two amazing points, Angela. I mean, the global context, because you're right, diversity is defined in such a different way in every regional context. We see this with the multinationals we engage. And then I think absolutely, treating this, what a great point, to not treat this work like it's this separate, being, separate entity, instead embed it in the natural way that you're approaching other business imperatives in your organization.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Well, I mean, I haven't cracked it. I'm by no means an expert. But
we're all working on it. Yeah.
As I said, we're all on our starting journey, but that's probably the biggest challenges from my side.
Thanks, Angela. Rocky, same question for you. I know we geek out on this all the time. What are some? And by the way, bless your heart, Rocky. I know you've had internet issues. I love the IRL mobile. I love the phone. This is good. This is good.
This is the reality of what happens in life, right? And we have to navigate all of these types of things. This is the new reality. And we have people who are working at home and lose internet and have dogs bugging them, and we still have to move forward, right? And
That's
so
right.
I want to answer this probably in a different way than I typically answer this question, because I think there's lots of challenges I've had, there's lots of mistakes I've made along the way. And we typically think of those in terms of process or operations or logistics, right? But what I want to talk about is the navigating of the diversity subtext, because I think this is a challenge that we don't often talk about. And it goes back to what you were saying, what some of our colleagues were saying. Diversity is difficult. And I want us to just all acknowledge that, right? This is uncomfortable, it's difficult. Diversity challenges long-held values of people, and it feels personal and it feels targeted. And there's guilt and shame involved, and we don't have the right words to use, and we aren't sure what we can and what we can't say. And we are being asked to literally openly discuss things that a lot of us have been told all of our lives to never talk about at work. So if you're out there and you grew up being raised never to talk about race, politics, religion, sex at work, you can give us a shout in the chat. But I think underestimating that subtext is probably one of the largest mistakes I've made. And so I think a lot of us approach this, and I put on my recruiting and my lean certification hat and my project management hat, and you want to find those quick wins, and you want this magic checklist and do these things, and it's suddenly going to be okay. Where I think what we all kind of need to do is take that step back and talk to the people in our organizations and understand, what does diversity mean to us? What are we trying to accomplish? What does success look like? Not what does Matheson's success look like? What does Smart Recruiter's success look like? To talk to our people and say, what do you need? What can we do that will make you be proud? And then build our framework around that. And I think if I could give any piece of advice from my own learning, I think you start there. Most of us start somewhere else, and we eventually go, oh, maybe we should ask our people. Maybe we should talk about what this means to us. And then we're already down a pathway that ultimately is not going to lead to sustainable outcomes. So I wanted to share from that perspective, because I know for sure I'm not by myself.
Rocky, I am so glad you did, because I think if we overlook that piece, it's building a house on the sand. There's no foundation. I think without acknowledging that this is deeply emotional work that ties into identity, that carries so much baggage with it. You're right, we have to do this internal cultural competency work. This is work that we're actually trying to do internally as a team of only 20. Because you're right, we actually believe, and I know this has been brilliant about your role, Rocky. By the way, Rocky, for everyone who doesn't know, has the coolest role in the world, gets to work with external partners, but also faces inward, which is what, a third of your portfolio is inward facing internal cultural competency work for Smart Recruiters, which I think is brilliant. I think it sets you up to be such a great external partner because you're practicing that work internally,
And those are, I think that's where I get my wins. When people come to me and say, we feel better, we feel safer, we feel heard, we feel like we can show up. That's the real win.
I love it. I love it. Thank you for bringing us there. It's so easy to get in the check the box mentality and go straight to our organizations without looking inward. So I appreciate that. Phil, let's bring you in. Let's show us that beautiful background again. Tell us how you're thinking about this, sort of learnings and mistakes so far.
Yeah, so the biggest challenge for me was just embracing that this isn't perfect work. As an early stage company, I joined Pay It at 33 people. You know, now we're in our Series B, 120 plus people. It was so easy to feel like any rejected offer, lost diversity leader or candidate was a major failure. But again, this is progress over perfection. Because this is emerging work, it needs to be experimental, and it will be experimental. The only mistake that I think you can make is just not starting the journey early enough or not embracing the journey. This is going to continue to be imperfect work, and we're all going to make mistakes along the way, and that's okay.
I love that. It's so true, Phil. It's so true. And I think if we obsess over perfection, we see this reflected largely in the way that so many organizations are reticent about sharing progress or sharing, even reporting out on activities, even early activities. Oh, we can't report out until we've gotten far enough. And I think that's a great example of, just making progress. Even sharing aspirations is a huge first step to bring the community along and to treat this as it's an ongoing effort. And it's a journey, not a destination, right?
Yeah.
So I want to shift gears, and we'll try to make this more of a discussion because I want to do the least amount of talking here. But next is, of course, we have a whole community of folks here who are on this journey, who are approaching work in probably at very different stages, but I think we all acknowledge that we're on the journey together. What are some practical tips, recommendations that you all have for folks here who are pursuing this work, and may, by the way, have the challenging task of bringing their colleagues on board to get beyond the posturing, to get beyond the box checking that we might be seeing? So let's kind of open this up. Maybe whoever's interested in taking that as a first step. Practical recommendations and tips here.
Well,
yeah, to go first. Go ahead, Rocky.
Okay. I think I'm biased, but if you're starting from scratch, I would take our assessment. Because when you talk about diversity, you can't ignore the pressure that we're all feeling about representation and building great candidate pools and attracting diverse talent. The challenge is that if you're in a smaller organization, or a lot of times if you're in a larger organization, someone has rolled up to TA and said, okay, this is now your bag. You're going to figure it out. You're going to hire all these diverse people, and that's going to solve the problem. And I think taking our assessment gives you a framework to say, well, wait a minute, this is only part of the equation. And even if I'm going to focus on attraction, this will give me a framework for the other pieces here. And that framework sits on 4 core pillars. We believe that you have to look at diversity, brand equity, fair hiring processes, sourcing strategically, and organizational support. And if you're starting from scratch, I think that gives you enough of a framework and a core, and each one of those have standards and actions that sit under it that you can objectively take back to your organization and say, here's where we start. We're at a level 1. This is how we get to a 2. Here's the actions that we take, and here's where I need your help.
Love it. That's a great starting point.
I think to build on that from Rocky's side, and it's something she actually said earlier, but for me, the starting point is, I love this term I've learned recently, extreme listening. And go back to your people, like Rocky mentioned before, talk, listen, experience, find out what their experience in their world looks like. Speak to your leaders about the topic. Kind of don't go into a situation thinking you know the answers. You're not there to have all the answers. You're there to just absorb, listen, ask open-ended questions. And sometimes it's quite difficult to go into a situation not with your own viewpoint, but try and almost have like a blank slate of what you're thinking, just to listen and be able to try and absorb and to truly understand what it is that people around you are telling you. So for me, there's a little bit of that. It's it's always looking at, it's absolutely things like assessments or data points and stuff that can help inform the story. But ultimately for me, number one, talk to your people and listen and learn how to listen. If you don't know how to do that yet, just keep practicing.
I love that.
So I'll maybe speak to those lean HR teams, those first-time heads of people out there, those junior HR professionals, or those first-time co-founders juggling 100 different hats. And maybe I'll talk about where I started. I wish I had Rocky's playbook when I started, but I didn't. I think a lot of people think you need this big budget to get your journey started. If you're a first-time people leader, sit down with your co-founders and talk about the journey before your first day. Every leader is in a different place in their DEI journey, and that is okay. Like we talked about, DEI is that one area of business where executives, leaders, people in general still feel shame. Everyone's not going to start in the same place. Find your leader's language of love, whether it's storytelling or data, and use that to be more influential and drive results. Talk to your team, talk to your people, and figure out things that the organization might not already be doing. That was something that we did at Pay It, and there was so much to uncover. Realize that every founder and leadership team might be new to this journey. They might have imposter syndrome too in talking about it. My dad used to always tell me that closed mouths don't get fed. And I think that silence won't move the needle here. From the boardroom down to the one-on-ones that are happening across your organization, you just have to be real about it.
It's powerful, Phil. And I love that notion of find everyone's language of love, because you're right. Part of the beauty of this being a deeply emotional, identity-driven conversation is that it does find a way to reach everyone, and it has a personal connection to everyone. I think it's about finding that avenue, right? How we can activate people around it. Switching gears a little bit, how should we think about approaching this work? If they're, Angela, you mentioned global organizations, but for companies with a global workforce, how do different cultures impact, an organization's DEI journey right now?
Yeah, again, as I said, I'm not sure if I've completely got this right, but I think it's just a challenge. I mean, if you ask these questions around what are some of the hot topics or the things that are kind of I suppose the heartbeat of what people are feeling at any given moment, it's very raw, it's very real, and it's very real to them. But it's also very different across geographies. It's different across sectors. It's different across how people talk about this topic. And so I don't think I've necessarily got the solution around it, except other than just keep listening and keep trying to understand the different viewpoints. But especially when you work in a global business, you have to coexist. You have to work well together. You have to be able to kind of be able to break down some of the barriers, or be able to acknowledge some of the things that different teams and different teams can bring to the table. But the whole point around it is with a global workforce, from my perspective, I find it really difficult. I find it really challenging. And I think the world is so polarized at the moment. I think everybody's kind of, on such different sides, and it's not creating more of that, but how do you truly bring people together? And how do you truly bring and create an environment that everybody wants to be part of? And for me, it was sort of trying to, and maybe it sort of sounds quite surface level or quite vanilla in the space, but it's trying to strip back everything that we're actually trying to do here, which is to create this culture of belonging and to celebrate the fact that people are different. And for us, there's something in the core of that feels right for us at Veeam. It feels like the right starting point. But I appreciate that there's a lot of, you were talking about systemic things across different geographies, across the world. There's so many problems to potentially try and unpick, and it's not surface level, it's deep. And so find the thing that's right for your organization, find the thing that's right for the people within your organization, listen to them, and just try and bring people together rather than creating more polarization, I guess.
It's powerful, Angela. Rocky and Phil, anything you'd add to that one?
So I don't work for a global organization, but I love to think about those macro trends that are happening globally. Like we're coming out of a global pandemic. I was talking to our customer care manager recently, and she took many years off of work to raise her family. And she said she was nervous in her paid interview process because she had a large employment gap. And I was like, what? You were nervous? But when I think about inclusion, like I wanted to make sure to educate her that it was not only okay to discuss that openly, but realize how that relates to so many of our lives and like the challenges this global pandemic just created. Like this was a global problem. Let's be honest, like mothers left the workforce in droves last year. Like working with her to change the narrative so that she could leverage that as a form of empowerment. Like you alluded to, Arthur, this isn't a people team problem. We're not going to solve this if just the people team tries to solve this. Encouraging inclusion by educating managers is a force multiplier for your business. I think we can continue to solve this problem globally by really just looking across the organization, learning where those force multipliers are.
And Phil, I'm really glad you brought, please, Rocky.
No.
Please.
I was going to say the only thing I would add to that, because Phil and Angela have done a great job, is that I think we spend a lot of time talking about race and gender, and we get focused on making numbers around particular dimensions of diversity. I think the way we start to look at this globally is to acknowledge that there are various dimensions of diversity. And it's about having a behavior and a culture of inclusion and belonging. And then if that's what we're leading with, then we can start to address the regional nuances while keeping our employees safe. But I think we have to take the focus away from numbers and productivity and start to shift the conversation around belonging and inclusion.
I think that's so spot on, and actually it gets to a question Carmen had asked around is the action inclusion and the results is improved diversity. And I think in many ways what you're saying and what we've talked a lot about is diversity is almost more of an input, right? We want to make sure there's representation in our workforce, and it's to the end of building an inclusive culture where people belong. And I think we all kind of agree that's the ultimate success here. A world maybe one day where we don't even need to be as focused on that input because of the amazing inclusive culture where everyone is celebrated, right?
Absolutely.
I love that. The last piece, and by the way, folks, start to type in your questions. Feel free to type them in the side, or you can submit them directly to us. We'll try to get through as many as we can to continue to unlock the brilliance here. How can we, as a software industry, because I know that so many folks here come from the software or technology space, how can we start to band together in this movement, in this work right now, instead of approaching this work in silos? What advice do you all have?
Well, I think it starts with conversations like this. And I one of the things that I have been so thrilled to see is, unlike other business problems, companies across industries are coming together to crowdsource solutions. We've become very adept at this kind of concept of crowdsourcing, and we're starting to use it now. And I also think it is it's about stakeholder capitalism and understanding what our role in this is. So there are some companies from a tech perspective that are looking to capitalize on this particular issue and say, I have the solution, the tech solution to solve diversity, instead of saying tech is a tool in the toolkit to help support your diversity journey. And so I think it's about having a bit of integrity and thinking about the greater good, and bringing us all together to help solve, and recognizing that there's not going to be a tech solution that solves this. It's a tool to be used in the toolbox.
Great point. Angela, Phil, anything you'd add there?
Sure.
Go ahead, Phil.
Please go first, Angela.
Okay, oh goodness. I think, I mean, I would absolutely echo what Rocky said. I think also, you know, we talk about it sometimes as in, you know, what can businesses do and what can companies do? And I think sometimes what we also just need to ask ourselves as individuals is what can I do? And what can we do as a team? And so, you know, you hold yourself accountable for your actions, how you treat people. You know, do you show up with kindness and empathy? Are you okay to be vulnerable in situations and admit that you've made mistakes and that you've, you know, maybe not handled things in the best possible way? Give back, be a mentor, you know, be mentored, be a mentee, keep learning, keep listening. And I think for me, it's leading by example, and it's holding yourself accountable and those around you accountable. You know, if you see something, you know, out there and you think that that wasn't right, or you don't think somebody behaved in a way, feel confident enough to be able to kind of mention it and stand up for people. And that for me, as well as the conversations and the extreme listening, are the things that I would endorse.
Thanks, Angela. So I think we're all on this call for a reason, even me, to learn from each other. There's a huge movement of community that's happening in the people space. There's no silver bullets. Technology is just a catalyst, but what more powerful of an industry could we be in than technology? I purposely tried to sprinkle community references throughout this chat. How can we continue to learn from each other? How can we build a deeper network of like-minded peers like Arthur and Angela and Rocky? That's just one of the reasons I think the Insight talent community is so powerful. Don't be afraid to reach out to other talent leaders across the portfolio. You're not going to have all the answers. I don't have many answers. I have a couple that I've learned from some really smart people around. Build a personal network of mentors and mentees. Working with others that are earlier in their journey or farther along in their journey are both opportunities to learn. Reach out to your leadership team and see if they have connections that have worked at other DEI organizations in the past that can help you understand what other organizations are doing, whether it's crowdsourcing or getting directly aligned with somebody. Information is powerful, especially in the age of information. Most importantly, just remember that you're not the only one that's in this journey and you're not doing it alone. We're all doing imperfect work that can only be improved by sharing knowledge and striving to do it better together.
Beautifully said, Phil. And I think that last piece of us not being alone demystifies and democratizes the work so that we don't have to all figure it out alone. Because I think, you know, any challenge we each face, inevitably many others are facing it. So I love this community that has formed here. It's very generous. So a couple other, we'll try to do this in kind of a speed, maybe a popcorn here, so we can get through a few of these questions in the last push here. So someone asked, when a company's starting their DEI journey and having a broad definition of diversity, how do you capture the way in which progress is made? Any ideas there?
Well, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. So you may have a broad definition of diversity. You need to talk about what success looks like in your organization, and that's how you should drive your metrics. You shouldn't be measuring what success looks like in your organization based on what's going on in mine. They may not be the right thing. So I think if you take the time to identify, we want to see an increase of X by this time. We want to see these processes improve. These are the things that success equals. Then you work backwards from there in terms of what your measurements are. I think we're all trying to look for sexy measurements, and we could give you a ton of them, but ultimately you want to measure what matters within your organization. That's kind of my point of view.
Yeah, and I think we can achieve that through self-ID, surveys, anonymous surveys, through empowering applicants to identify it in the process itself. We know, of course, that depends on legislation or laws locally, but a lot that can be done there, right?
Absolutely.
A lot that the ATS is doing, smart recruiters, right? So that's awesome. Okay, so Theo asked, and I'll try to read this quickly. So in this part of Southern Florida, diversity is a topic that not many people elaborate on. And the tech industry is different slightly from the rest, but still there's a long way to go. How do we persuade people that it's okay to talk about diversity and express themselves, essentially? Thoughts there? Angela, this might be a good one for you, given the proximity.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's again, it's knowing your audience, knowing where they are on their own sort of comfortableness of what they're prepared to talk about. And it's just, if you go in with no agenda and just literally to get to know them a bit more and get to know what they're thinking and what they're feeling and what it is that they, you know, is what's important to them, I think you can never go wrong, because ultimately it's just trying to build a bond and trying to form, you know, where they are on their journey and their stories. So, you know, you don't have to go in with a hard-hitting message of this is what we're trying to achieve and this is by when. I think you just go in and you ask lots of questions and you start to explore. And what you'll always find, if you really are listening, is themes. You know, Phil spoke earlier about macro trends and trends you'll start to see. And when you identify them, you start to form a kernel of something and you think, okay, maybe there's something in, and then you ask more questions and you find out more around it. But unfortunately, there's not a quick, simple way to do it. There's not a one-dimensional answer. For me, it's you've got to go in and do the work, and you've got to go and kind of speak to people and find out.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is a great point. And you're right, to take this to the personal level is the way to go here. The last question I think that we have time for, John's question around, can you elaborate on the equity issue, ensuring fairness in job leveling, compensation, RAFs, et cetera?
I think that's more than a minute-long question.
Right? I know it is. This is the Reader's Digest version.
Yeah, I do think you have to make a decision internally within your organization about the difference between equality and equity and understand those challenges. And if you're talking about pay equity, to your point, there's some really standardized things you can do in terms of building pay grades and, you know, not making offers based on someone's current compensation, but leveling that out and doing the investigation internally to say, do I have any discrepancies? Do I have people who are in the same job where there's big gaps, and those gaps either are a pay equity issue or could be perceived as one? Like that's as quick Reader's Digest as I can get.
It's wonderful, and you're right. I think it's important that we take this opportunity to be systemic in the way we think about this work, because it is the design of our existing systems that have gotten us where we are, the inequity of those systems. And if we don't change them, if we don't do that deep work, nothing will really change, right? So I appreciate it. Is a much longer conversation, but one that I'm glad people are going to, and it's an important part of the acronym DEID, right? Well, I want to thank you. I know we're at time, everyone. How cool is it that this is our full-time, these are our jobs, that we get to spend time like this together. Thank you to the Insight Partners team for bringing us together and building community around this important topic. And thank you to you three for your work in the efforts.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you everyone for joining us, and we will be in touch with the pledge information as well. So thank you, Arthur, Phil, Angela, and Rocky. Have a great afternoon/morning.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.